Welcome to the best time of the whole week, Saturday morning. The rush of the workaday world is in the past. Monday still hasn't reared its ugly head. And this is the one day you can just sit back and relax, if even for just a moment. And one of the ways I love to relax on Saturday morning is with a nice, hot, frothy cappuccino. Somehow, through divine providence, no doubt, you have stumbled into this little corner of the internet and have discovered this podcast, Saturday Cappuccino with the Saints. Because after all, who better to share a cup of coffee with than one of the uncountable number of saints from our tradition? Each week, we set aside a little bit of time to discuss the saint of the week, or two. Some weeks are packed, as well as explore any major festivals of the Christian tradition coming up or just celebrated. I've always been a history nerd, and church history, especially with the stories and lives of the saints, are a continual source of inspiration. I hope you enjoy this little respite from the normal grind. And now, sit back, pour yourself a nice frothy cappuccino or the drink of your choice. Don't worry, no one checks. And enjoy. And don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel if you want to continue to see our content. And remember to hit the notification bell to be alerted to new videos. And so now, on to this week's episode. It has often been said that our modern world just doesn't have any heroes anymore. The old ones have all been toppled from their places of honor and relegated to the dustbin of history, tossed away like so much debris and clutter from the past. Modern 21st century America loves to tear down the honored men and women of days gone by. It is our favorite national pastime. And yet, no society can function without heroes, and that includes our own. And who do we, as a culture, admire today? Entertainers, celebrities, athletes, YouTube influencers? These are but mere pitiful shadows of the truly heroic, pale and pathetic imitations of the truly honorable. Instinctually, we shake our heads at this sad state of affairs, but acknowledge that that is where we are today. But it needn't be so. There are numerous examples of true heroism from our Christian past, and few are more inspiring than the saint we will study this week, Saint Lawrence. Subjected to horrific tortures under the Emperor Valerian in the mid-3rd century, he literally laughed in the face of death as he earned his martyr's crown. He is the very model of courage, devotion, and heroism, and his example should inspire us all. He also has a connection to one of the most fabled objects in all of history, the Holy Grail. So this is one episode you will definitely not want to miss. It is going to be a fascinating morning. Let us pray. Almighty God, by whose grace and power your servant Lawrence triumphed over suffering and despised death, grant that we may be steadfast in service to the poor and outcast, and may share with him in the joys of your everlasting kingdom, through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. A great video kind of gives you the little bit of the background of St. Lawrence. It's put out by the St. Paul Center. I highly recommend on YouTube you look up their videos. They do all kinds of videos on the lives of the saints and various things about church history. So, but they put out a great little short piece about St. Lawrence a couple years ago, and I thought I would share it with you now.
In the early centuries of Christianity, the Church of Rome kept 7 deacons. No more and no less. They did this to imitate the apostles who, as Scripture tells us, appointed 7 deacons for the church in Jerusalem. In the middle of the 200s, the most popular of these deacons was a man named Lawrence. Now, Lawrence had a lot of jobs. Among them were the care of the poor and the custody of the precious vessels used in the liturgy. Unfortunately for him, Lawrence lived during the first sweeping empire-wide persecution of the Christian church. The Emperor Decius was demanding that everyone living under Roman rule must worship the Roman gods or be killed. Recognized as a Christian leader, Lawrence was arrested. The Romans knew that he was in charge of the church's gold and silver vessels. so his arresting officers asked him to take them to the treasures of the church. Now, Lawrence said he'd be happy to, and then he led them down winding Roman streets till they reached a slum. Then he pointed to the poor who lived there and said, "There is the treasure of the church." Lawrence knew the poor are the treasure of the church because Jesus identified himself with them. Now, needless to say, the Romans were not amused, and they condemned Lawrence to be roasted on a gridiron, a brutal death. And yet he kept his sense of humor to the end. After a few minutes on the grill, he told his executioner, "Turn me over. I'm done on this side." To this day, Lawrence is held up as a model of Christian joy. He's a model for deacons. He's a model for those who advocate for the poor. And he's even the patron saint of cooks and chefs. He exemplifies the good life as we find it in the Bible and the Church Fathers.
If you haven't got Lawrence fever yet, just stay tuned. You will. Here's some other facts about St. Lawrence. He was born in Huesca, Spain in 225 AD. He was martyred in Rome on August 10th, 258 AD. He was the archdeacon of Rome under the Saint Pope Sixtus II, and he was entrusted with all the treasures of the church. One of the things he's most famous for is his statement that he made as he was being grilled to death over the fire. He said to his tormentors, "I'm well done on this side. Turn me over." If that doesn't make you love the guy, I don't know what would. I mean, this guy is a very model of being a hero, and I can't get enough of St. Lawrence. Because of his rather stoic remarks to his tormentors and adding a little humor to about as dark a situation as you can be in, St. Lawrence is the patron saint of comedians. My wife and I went to Rome on our honeymoon, and I will say, if you haven't been to Rome, make sure you put it on your bucket list. It was an unbelievable trip. I mean, we were there a week. We could have stayed there a month and not seen half of what there is to see, especially for, ancient history nuts like me. I mean, I was like a kid in a candy store. But one of the things that I remember seeing, and this is a picture of it here, we went to this tiny little church, San Lorenzo. And San Lorenzo Church has the grill that St. Lawrence was martyred on. They still have it underneath the altar, and you can go see it. So very grisly, but very interesting and appropriate to show this on St. Lawrence Day. If all that wasn't enough to earn St. Lawrence your just undying respect and admiration, this next little tidbit about St. Lawrence is just fascinating. And because of that, and it's such a big deal, and it appeals to people like me, I have decided to have an appropriate fanfare announcing its discussion. So that's coming up. That, of course, was from the funniest movie ever made, still, 50 years later, Monty Python's Search for the Holy Grail. It is just such a funny movie. If I'm ever in a bad mood, I just got to put that movie in, and I am immediately cheered up. It's one of the few movies I can think of that, I mean, it was funny when I saw it for the first time when I was about 13, 14 years old, and it's still funny. A lot of things that I thought was funny when I was 13 aren't so funny anymore. For example, I used to think the Pink Panther movies were just the height of humor. That hasn't aged so well. Quick funny story about this. Um, you are either in one of two camps. You either love Monty Python, you think he's great, or you just don't get it. I've outed myself completely here. I'm a huge Monty Python fan. I've been a huge Monty Python fan since the 70s, so long time. My wife, on the other hand, is not a Monty Python fan at all. I don't think she'd ever seen it. And when we were still dating, I mean, this is many, many years ago, Eric Idle came here to Richmond in concert, and I was all excited, charged up, and so I took Mary with me. We went on a date, and so we're in the audience, and everybody there is just having a great time, and everybody singing the Lumberjacks song, and I Like Chinese, and everybody was quoting the Dead Parrot sketch. I mean, it was all the classics. And about halfway through the evening, Mary turns to me and says, is this some sort of cult that you're in? And I go, well, it probably technically is. I mean, because people who love Monty Python just love it so much. But that's a diversion. The real thing I wanted to talk about today, along with St. Lawrence, is the Holy Grail. That's in Valencia, one of the claimants to the Holy Grail. I think you can make a case that this might be the real deal. So we'll be exploring that shortly. If you remember last week, we discussed the Holy Grail slightly when we were talking about St. Joseph of Arimathea and how it's involved so much in the mythology of England. I still stand by that I believe that those are all myths, but I think sometimes it's clouded the issue and made people think that the whole idea of the Holy Grail itself is a myth. I don't think it's a myth. I think there was a Holy Grail, and I think that the chalice in Valencia, Spain, has a pretty good claim to it. Now the problem, of course, is you can't swing a dead cat and not hit 100 grails. I mean, they're all over the place. You know, the Middle Ages were notorious for having relics all over the place. I mean, relics were big money. If your church or cathedral could claim to have a head of John the Baptist or the Holy Grail or a leg of St. Anthony, then you could get pilgrims come in, and it was a money-making operation. That has tainted the issue quite a bit. And the Holy Grail, there's a bunch of different claimants for the Holy Grail, so it does get confusing. But when you analyze each one of the individual claimants to being the Holy Grail and what evidence they have, they're all on somewhat pretty sketchy ground. I mean, the classic was last week with Joseph of Arimathea. The Grail that's in the Valencia Cathedral, however, has a pretty good pedigree and a pretty good backstory. Doesn't involve King Arthur or quests or any kind of mythological trappings. It's a pretty straightforward story, and it's pretty interesting. If you're interested in the topic, there are no shortage of books on the subject. The problem is most of them are total nonsense. They either go down the Da Vinci Code road, which is that the Holy Grail is the secret bloodline of Christ, and get into all kind of Gnostic nonsense like that, or like I talked about last week with Saint Joseph of Arimathea. I mean, it's all an interesting story, but there's no historical meat there. I mean, it's all just fables and myths from the past. There is, however, one book that I really would highly recommend. It's by Janice Bennett. It's St. Lawrence and the Holy Grail. Came out, a while ago, probably 20 years ago, but I think it's still available on Amazon. So I would recommend her book. Thoroughly well researched, lots of footnotes. She's not making a lot of claims that this is the Holy Grail based on some sort of magical things happening or things like that. She's got a pretty good case to make. A couple years ago, after I read the book, I found a documentary on YouTube about her book, And I was able to download a couple clips of it that I think will help make this case. Now, I apologize up front. I don't know why, but they're all with Greek subtitles. So ignore the Greek subtitles at the bottom. But the people in the documentary and in the video clips make a pretty good case. So stay tuned.
Amongst the problems she faced were the many rival grails.
Well, we believe that by the 16th century, there were at least 20 chalices or other objects that claimed to be the Holy Grail.
There are three well-known grails today. The Genoa chalice, now proven to be a glass dish of Islamic origin.
Then we have the Antioch chalice, which is a beautiful silver work with a lot of decoration and human figures around. But the human figures alone prove that it must be Byzantine, because in Judaism, human figures were forbidden.
And if the Antioch chalice was too recent, then the wooden Nantius cup, with no provenance before the 19th century, was no contender either. One by one, Janice ruled out the pretenders. But how could she prove that the cup in Valencia was the real one? The solution had to be in proper archaeological testing.
For one thing, the object needs at least to be intrinsically plausible. So it needs to be something that does come from the 1st century, or at least plausibly comes from the 1st century, is something that somebody like Jesus, a Jewish peasant from Galilee, might have had, or his sponsors or friends might have had.
Janice discovered that the only detailed independent scientific analysis done on the chalice was by Dr. Antonio Beltran in the 1960s.
Professor Beltran was the professor at the University of Zaragoza, a leading Spanish archaeologist who, in the 1960s, was commissioned by the Archbishop of Valencia to study the relic of the Santo Cáliz from an archaeological point of view and to date it.
A prolific academic author and one of Spain's leading archaeologists, Beltran was also an expert on artwork of the ancient world.
Dr. Beltran felt that he didn't have to worry about whether or not it was authentic, that he could just proceed without concern about what the church would think if he saw that this wasn't possible to have been on the table of the Last Supper.
Dr. Beltran's findings were startling. He stated that the chalice was made up of 3 distinct parts. The base, the stem, and the upper cup. And they were all from different periods. The gold work linking the base to the upper cup was the most recent.
At a certain point, probably in the 14th century, those 2 stone elements are put together. The gold work seems very much in keeping with what gold work is in Spain in the 14th century.
If you see the golden frame, this is clearly medieval work. There's no question about it.
Dr. Beltran said the base was made of chalcedony stone. He concluded it was probably an inverted incense burner, chosen as a base to support the cup because of its similarity in color and material. But its design and poor quality of craftsmanship indicated it was possibly from as late as the 9th century, and so couldn't have anything to do with the true Grail. Beltran then focused all his attention on the upper cup. It too was made from chalcedony, but exquisitely crafted and of a very high quality, similar to those made at a very specific period of time.
And he dated it into the Hellenistic period, 3rd to 1st century before Christ. And you can prove it very easily that this dating is correct by just comparing it with other archaeological discoveries from this period.
And there was more than it just dating from the right period. According to Beltran, the upper cup was a great example of a luxury stone item from the skilled workshops of the Eastern Mediterranean, the very area Jesus Christ came from.
He said that these stone cups were fabricated in workshops in Egypt, Syria, and the Mediterranean, that they were actually very common in Greek and Roman times, and that they were used on luxurious tables. They were almost entirely made of hard stone, like chalcedony, and they were very expensive to make.
Critically, these valuable vessels stopped being manufactured around 50 AD, when they were replaced by glassware, which was cheaper and quicker to produce. So according to Beltran, the upper cup is definitely of the right design and type, from the right place and period. But trying to tie a specific object to a specific moment in history, like the Last Supper, is almost impossible.
There's no way to prove scientifically it was the cup of Christ. But what you can prove is that there is a possibility that it was used by Christ.
To try and find that proof, Janice went back to the historical context of the Last Supper. Could this have been the type of cup Jesus might have used?
Jesus was Jewish. And the chalice of the Last Supper was used for a Seder, for a Passover meal.
The Bible tells how in the last week of his life, Jesus went to Jerusalem to celebrate the feast of Passover. Passover is one of the most important festivals in the Jewish year. At this time, Jewish people remember how God liberated them from slavery under the pharaohs in ancient Egypt. In preparation for the Passover meal, everything must be thoroughly cleansed or koshered. Anything porous or with cavities that cannot be ritually purged isn't used. So the chalice used for wine at the Last Supper had to have been pure. This would have ruled out wood and other materials.
They also did not use a clay chalice, because clay might have had little captivities in it. They did not use silver, because silver was used for pagan coins, and you had pagan deities imprinted on it.
Stone was the obvious answer.
You find stone vessels all over the Holy Land in Jewish settlements from the time of Christ, in which they kept water for purification. So the perfect choice would have been a stone vessel. And indeed, the Holy Grail in Valencia is a stone vessel made out of beautiful agate.
I find it interesting that in all the documentaries and things I've read about the Grail, it really wasn't until relatively recently, I mean like in the last 15, 20 years, that I never even heard of the Valencia Grail. It's almost like some sort of weird conspiracy against it. I had heard about the Antioch chalice that you see on the left that was referred to in the video, or the Nantius chalice, which is made out of wood, that's on the right. I'd heard about them when I was back in high school and interested in the subject. As the video pointed out, neither one of these are really good contenders, especially when you consider the kosher aspect. A silver chalice would never be used, especially if it had images all over it on a Jewish Seder. And same thing for a wooden cup. A wooden cup could never be purified. But I find it very interesting that these two contenders somehow in our popular imagination have more play than the actual real good contender, the Valencia chalice in Spain. So obviously Indiana Jones chose unwisely. If you remember the movie, Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, when he goes and there's all those chalices and he's got to pick the one that was the real one, and he picked a clay chalice because he said that would have been something that a carpenter would use. It made sense. It made for a good movie, but luckily for Indy, it was only a movie. Otherwise, he would have been killed, because that could not be the contender. The story of the Grail, of course, starts with the story of the Last Supper, and the Last Supper that took place in the upper room, which is a key element of this story. And I want to note, before I read the gospel passage, that this Renaissance painting of the Last Supper, look at the cup directly in front of Jesus. The painter of this painting obviously was editorializing a bit, because that is the cup of Valencia. That's the chalice. You can tell by the stemware that's very unique. So we know where this painter stood on what the real Holy Grail was. But here's the gospel reading from Mark. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to go to make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" So he sent 2 of his disciples, telling them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. Say to the owner of the house he enters, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." The disciples left, went into the city, and found things just as Jesus had told them. So they prepared the Passover. I'm going to note, it seems like the owner, or that this was prearranged. So the owner of the upper room was obviously somehow associated, with Jesus and his disciples, and I think that plays a pretty significant part in the story of the Grail going forward. The thing to cue in here is the upper room, the fact that that's mentioned, and a very ancient tradition that can be traced back to at least the year 530 AD, and it probably goes back even earlier, says that the house of the Last Supper that hosted it, the owner of the upper room, was the mother of St. Mark, which I think is going to play a part in this story of the Grail as we go forward. Now, this is an appeal out there to the Grail skeptics among us that just dismiss all this as just mumbo jumbo, hocus pocus. But here's a little thought experiment, and it's a good one if you think about it. As you saw in the video, and it's obvious that these cups that were used in these Passover meals, seders, were incredibly important. The cup that was used at Jesus' last Seder, Last Supper, would have been incredibly important to his followers. So what would we think would happen to such an object of obvious reverence after the resurrection? I mean, do we really think that they would have just tossed it in the trash or lost track of it or given it back? I mean, it seems reasonable to assume that something that had such significance as the cup that the Son of God used as at the Last Supper to institute the Eucharist would have been kept. I mean, that's not relying on some sort of magic or magical thinking. That just seems like human nature. So something happened to the actual Grail, and you have to think, okay, well, what would have happened to it? So just keep that in mind as we go forward. One theory about what happened to the Grail after the resurrection is that Peter, the chief apostle, went to Rome. We know that. That's tradition. That's history. We have documentary evidence of that. And that he brings St. Mark with him. St. Mark, the author of the Gospel of Mark, and was a close companion of Peter. Well, Mark's mother, if she owned the upper room, she owned the house where the upper room was located, it was probably her cup, okay, that was used. And most likely, after the resurrection, she would have given it to Mark, or Mark would have given it to Peter. And if Mark and Peter both went to Rome, I'm pretty confident they would have taken the cup with them.
If this was the real Grail, how had it got from the Holy Land in the 1st century to 21st century Spain?
Well, of course, it was very important for me to trace the story of this chalice from the beginning. You know, how did it get from Jerusalem to Spain?
Janice needed to work out how the cup might have left Jerusalem in the first place.
Establishing the authenticity of any object that supposedly goes back to Jesus, whether it be the chalice, the cross, the nails, is incredibly difficult, and it requires an awful lot of detective work.
So Janice focused on the events following the Last Supper. Going back to the earliest traditions of the church, she discovered St. Peter was said to have gone from Jerusalem to Rome, where he became the first pope.
Well, we believe that St. Peter was made the head of the church by Jesus himself. He's given the name Peter, which means rock. He is the rock on which the church is built.
Janice felt it likely that because of his importance in early Christianity, St. Peter would have been given the cup and taken it to Rome.
Certainly, something as precious as the cup used by Jesus at that Last Supper surely would have been saved in some way, surely would have been passed down, and St. Peter is the likely sort of person who might end up with it.
She believed he would have then used this cup to celebrate the first Eucharist.
Christians felt that relics were extremely important because they were really a link between past and present. They represented something that was sacred, something beyond human comprehension.
But the fact that it could have been given to St. Peter was hardly proof. She needed to find more evidence.
Populus errantium corde suntis.
She looked into the earliest traditions of the Eucharist and discovered that when the Mass was codified, it had a very particular form of words.
In the Roman Catholic Mass, we have two different versions of the consecration. You have the general canon and the Roman canon. And the Roman canon says not Christ took the cup in his hands, but it says hunc preclarem calicem, what means this very chalice.
By saying this very chalice, did it mean that when the Pope celebrated Mass then, they were using the actual Holy Grail from the Last Supper? Janice believed what is just tradition now was based on actual facts back then.
The Roman canon of the Mass are the words that Jesus spoke at the Last Supper. It originated in Rome with St. Peter and his followers, his successors. So many scholars would believe that this was the actual cup that had been used by Christ, and that the popes were very well aware of that fact.
This is incredibly significant. That there are, and it's documented, there are two different sayings for the institution for the Eucharist. One that the Pope in Rome would use, and the second for everyone else. We have this documented. There's plenty of evidence for this. What's really interesting is that these two different rites existed up until the year 258 AD, which is a significant date, which is when the Valerian persecution, which we'll be talking about in just a bit, happened, and this has involved St. Lawrence. After that, there wasn't the Roman rite used anymore, but it was all the Eastern rite. And as was pointed out in the video, when the Pope at Mass performed Eucharist, he would say, in like manner, after he had supped, taking this very cup into his holy and venerable hands, and giving thee thanks, he blessed and gave his disciples, saying, the rest of it, as opposed to everywhere else when the Mass is performed. It says, in like manner, after he supped, he took the cup with the wine, saying. The fact that the Pope would say this very cup, indicating that he was using the actual cup during the Mass, I think is incredibly significant. And it's very interesting. We have evidence of this. We have these written down, and we know when it stopped, which also is significant. The Catholic Church has never actually said definitively one way or the other whether they believe that the Valencia Grail is the Holy Grail or not. But truthfully, they never really declare definitively one way or the other. They always, kind of leave their options open. I mean, they still say that the Shroud of Turin, for example, is something to be venerated, but they aren't going to come down one way or the other, despite overwhelming evidence. That's a separate subject, but which I'll get into eventually one day. But I do think they give clues as to what they actually think. And here's a big one. When Pope John Paul II was in Valencia, Spain in 1982, he used the Valencia Cup when he celebrated Mass. Even stronger evidence of how the Church really feels about the Grail of Valencia came in 2006 when Pope Benedict was in Valencia, and he used the same Valencia Grail at High Mass. And to put a cherry on top of that cake, he actually used the old rite, where when he lifted the cup, he said, and the Lord took this very cup. That was the first time that rite had been used since 258 AD. Now, he didn't say this is the real thing, but that seems like a strong, strong hint that he believed it was a real deal. So we can see how the Grail got from Jerusalem, 30 AD, to Rome, and was used there for centuries by successive popes. I mean, that seems like a reasonable trail. But how did the Grail get from Rome to Spain, of all places, which was kind of out on the edge of the empire? And more importantly, why did it end up in Spain? That's a really interesting question. And thus enters onto stage our good friend and great hero and patron saint of comedians and cooks, St. Lawrence, who was the chief deacon of the church at the time and a close associate of the Pope. And he plays a very central role in what happens to the Grail after the year 258. In the year 257, one of the worst persecutions of the early church history began under the Emperor Valerian. He was at the time fighting the Persians, and the war was going badly, and he looked around for why is our luck turned, and he came across the idea that Christians are upsetting the traditional gods by not offering sacrifices, and so he put forward an edict that all citizens of the empire had to make sacrifices to the Roman gods in order to appease them, and therefore turn Rome's fortunes around. This immediately caused a conflict with the Christians and led to one of the most vicious persecutions of the church. I'm going to take this opportunity to clear up a little bit of a misconception I think we have from history, especially Hollywood. There was definitely Christian persecution in the Roman Empire, starting with Nero and onwards. But for the most part, most of the time, it was usually fairly local. Nero persecuted the Christians in Rome, but it wasn't an empire-wide persecution. Domitian, there were more persecutions under Domitian, but again, that was more of a local issue. A lot of the early martyrs, there would be a governor or a local ruler that would think that something's up with these Christians, if we need to do something about them, and that's where there'd be persecution. But it was usually not widespread. It was just in a particular area. It wasn't until the 3rd century, which was a miserable time during the Roman Empire. I mean, if things could go bad, they were going bad on all fronts. Inflation was out of control. There were multiple people claiming to be emperor at the same time. Constant civil war. I think in a period of about 30 years, there were like 20 emperors. Rome came very close to completely disintegrating. And in the pagan world, in the pagan mentality, in the pagan worldview, if things are going badly for you, it probably means that the gods are upset. And the gods can be appeased by sacrificing to them. And that's where the main conflict, where these big empire-wide persecutions began, was really in the 3rd century, when Rome was really having trouble. And they needed to make sure the gods were appeased, so they would issue these rulings that everyone in the empire needs to sacrifice to the gods, and provide proof, a little certificate that you did. And that immediately brought them into conflict with the Christian at that time. That's where the first persecutions came from, that were really empire-wide. And Valerian was one of the worst, and was the one that took the life of St. Lawrence. On August 6, 258, Pope Sixtus II was martyred by this first big wave of the empire-wide persecutions. And Valerian, his soldiers also captured Lawrence at the time, and gave him a couple days to gather up all the treasures of the church. Otherwise, he too was going to be martyred. So that's what started the whole countdown for St. Lawrence. When my wife and I visited Rome, one of the places we went was to the catacombs, which is outside of Rome. Really unbelievable place. I mean, it was a fascinating tour. It was hard to get there, and nobody spoke English, and we were having trouble getting a cab. It was so desperate that our dog that we bought recently after that, we named Tassi, which is Italian for taxi, because we were constantly trying to get cabs. It'd be different now because it'd be Uber. It'd be a lot easier. But one of the places we went to St. Calixtus Catacombs, and we actually got to see the site of Pope Sixtus II's martyrdom. It's marked there in the catacombs, and he's actually buried there on site. If you haven't become a giant fan of Lawrence yet, well, one, there's something wrong with you. But this story surely will put you over the top. I'm going to read a little passage here from a story about it. It's very interesting. After the death of Sixtus, the prefect of Rome demanded that Lawrence turn over the riches of the church. And St. Ambrose wrote that Lawrence asked for 3 days to gather the wealth. He worked swiftly to distribute as much church property to the indigent as possible, to prevent it from being seized by the prefect. On the 3rd day, at the head of a small delegation, he presented himself to the prefect. When ordered to deliver the treasures of the church, he presented the city's indigent, crippled, and blind and suffering, and declared that these were the true treasures of the church. Here are your treasurers of the church. You see, the church is truly rich, far richer than your emperor. By the way, that didn't go over well, and was no doubt a big part of the reason that Lawrence met his death on the grill. But you just gotta really give it to a guy that's got that kind of steel in his spine to really put it to the man like that. I admire Lawrence greatly. Now, Lawrence distributed the wealth of the church, the gold and the silver, to the poor. But there's certain things that the church had that are irreplaceable, that no money could possibly compensate for. The Grail would have been one of those things. And the story goes, and it seems very reasonable to assume, that these would be objects that would be sent somewhere for safekeeping. And the story goes, and it makes sense that it would go this way, that St. Lawrence sent the Holy Grail back to his family in Huesca, Spain for safekeeping. And as you will see soon, there's a strong tradition in Spain backing this story up. Every year on August 10th in Huesca, Spain, today, is a big celebration for St. Lawrence Day. He is the ultimate example of the local boy makes good. So if you were in Spain on August 10th, you would see a huge celebration of St. Lawrence. This isn't really part of the story of St. Lawrence, but it's a nice little trivia bit to drop. The Emperor Valerian, despite his giant persecution of the Christian community to appease the gods, obviously it didn't work because he was captured by the Persian king Shapur I in the Battle of Edessa in 260. One of, I think, only one or two, maybe three emperors to ever be captured on the battlefield. A terrible, terrible blow to Roman prestige, and the shame was tremendous. He spent the rest of his life actually as the footstool for the Persian king Shapur. So karma came to bite the emperor in the end. So we can kind of trace the Grail from Jerusalem to Rome, and then from Rome to Spain. And then it kind of went underground for a while. And there's a good reason for that. Within just about 100 years of this was the collapse of the empire in the West. The barbarian invasions started around the 400s, and it was complete and utter chaos in the Western Roman Empire. The East went on for centuries. Trivia question here. If somebody says, when did Rome fall? You could tell a lot about a person by how they answer that question. If you say the year 470, that's true for the Western. 476, that's true for the Western Roman Empire. The East, however, went on and on for a long time until May of 1453. But during this time of chaos, when you had the Goths and the Visigoths and the Alans and the Franks and the Jutes and the Vandals rampaging through the empire, the Grail was kept underground. In the 711, Spain again was under siege, this time by the Moors, the Muslim invaders from the south. And as you can see from this map, Al-Andalus, which is Muslim Spain, almost the entire country fell to the Muslim forces. Only the northern edge of Spain, up in the mountains, remained Christian. Eventually, the Christian forces reconquered all of Spain. But during this period of time, the Grail was again in danger and kept hidden away for safekeeping. And where it ended up was in San Juan de la Peña Monastery. The Holy Chalice remained in Huesca for 450 years until the Moorish invasion of Spain in 711. 1 year later, the Bishop of Huesca, knowing of the advance of the invaders, decided to abandon the city of Huesca, together with his clergy, soldiers, and the people who did not wish to live under a Muslim yoke. They carried with them whatever was the most precious from their churches, and above all, the Holy Chalice of the Last Supper. They continued their retreat little by little in successive steps through the most hidden trails of the Pyrenees until they arrived secretly at San Juan de la Peña, a monastery shrouded in mystery and the inspiration of the legends which became the custodian of the precious relic for 400 years. And that's where the chalice remained throughout the Middle Ages. Eventually, however, the Muslim forces were driven from Spain, and Spain once again returned to Christian rule. And after the conquest, the Reconquista, the Holy Chalice was given to the King of Spain. And that's how it ended up in Valencia. Sadly, that is not the end of the troubles and threats against the Holy Grail. After nearly 2,000 years of being hidden away and kept safe by generations of faithful Christians, the Grail came the closest to being destroyed during the Spanish Civil War. We forget sometimes in this country about how vicious and terrible the Spanish Civil War was in the 30s. But it was a terrible time. And one of the worst of the times was during the Red Terror, when the communist forces rampaged through Spain, raping nuns, burning down monasteries, burning down churches, destroying all the relics that they could get their hands on. And this was a really dicey time for the Grail. In this particular picture, it's a very gruesome shot, and I'm sorry to be gratuitous, but I think this is something a lot of people is just collectively we've decided not to talk about. But here's an example of the Red Terror, where the communist forces dug up a cemetery full of Carmelite nuns and put all their corpses on display in the town square. Terrible, terrible time. And this was probably the closest, after all these centuries and thousands of years, that the Grail came to be almost destroyed. Some very quick-thinking people that were worshiping in the Cathedral of Valencia when the communist forces had surrounded the church kept the Grail safe. One of the women that was part of the group hid the Grail under her coat and pretended to be pregnant, and thus was able to smuggle it out, because the communist forces had come specifically to the Cathedral of Valencia to destroy it. And thank God she had the presence of mind to save the Grail, which is there in Valencia to this day. So let's review. I think we've pretty firmly established that these kind of stone cups that were very unique to that area at that particular time of Jesus and match up to the Grail of Valencia, that we've established that it's a good candidate that this could have and probably was the Grail used at the Last Supper. There's plenty of archaeological evidence, not saying there's no archaeological evidence that can prove that it's absolutely the Grail, but it certainly checks all the boxes that would be required. There's a history of usage at the Mass in Rome from St. Peter to St. Sixtus II, using that old rite where they said that this very cup. So there's evidence that they believe that the Holy Grail was there in Rome. And then there's a connection between St. Lawrence sending the Grail to Spain, where his hometown was, and its eventual appearance in Spain. And this is not direct evidence, but it's pretty indicative of the importance of the Holy Grail to Spain and to Spanish history for all these thousands of years. That is not proof, but it sure indicates that that they believe that it's the Holy Grail. So I believe the quest that has gone on for centuries, involving King Arthur and Lancelot and Indiana Jones and so many others, I think the quest can be called off. The Grail was right there in plain sight all along. The Grail has been found.
A blessing from the Lord. God be praised.
It seems only appropriate that we end our discussion of the Holy Grail and, of course, St. Lawrence with the prayer that is said every Thursday afternoon in the month of July in the Chapel of the Holy Grail in the Valencia Cathedral. July is devoted to the sacred blood, so it's appropriate that this would be the prayer that would be said, and it's specifically the prayer for the chalice's blessing. Holy Father, we humbly come before you, seeking strength and grace as we lift the chalice of life. May we embrace the sorrows and joys it brings, transforming our hearts to reflect your love. Grant us the wisdom to share in your suffering and the joy of salvation. Amen. Thank you for spending your Saturday morning with us. Next week, we'll be exploring yet another hero from our Christian past, so be sure to tune in. Until then, keep your faith warm, your cappuccino hot and frothy, and have a great week. See you next week for another Saturday Cappuccino with the Saints.